right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of In the Tractor Seat. We have Deputy Commissioner of Commerce, Julia Dreier here, joining us to talk about all things health insurance and the insurance markets. She is, as I mentioned, the Deputy Commissioner for Commerce's Insurance Division, which serves Minnesotans through insurance policy and insurance regulation, including company licensing, examination, policy, and rate reviews for health, homeowners, auto, workers' compensation, long-term care, and life insurance, and for pharmacy benefits management. Her appointment began July 26, 2021, and has experience working at both the federal and state level on insurance policy. Prior to joining the Department of Commerce, Deputy Commissioner Dreier was most recently with the IMPAQ, am I saying that right? International, a global policy research and analytics firm based in Washington, D.C., where she provided strategic policy and operational advice to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And she was previously part of the leadership team in the CMS, Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight, and led efforts to implement the Affordable Care Act commercial insurance market reforms. In Minnesota, Dreier worked in public policy for the Minnesota Council of Health Plans and for the Service Employees International Union. So that's her bio. Welcome, Commissioner, and we'll kick it to you. And if I missed anything in your introduction there, feel free to introduce yourself. And I know you have a presentation here too, so feel free to share your screen and we'll go from there.
That sounds good. You did great with all those acronyms and other fun things.
I was trying to find it on my screen and pull it all up, and that was the first time I read it.
All right, give me just a second here where I share my screen. It always takes a minute for me to get everything going and get it all switched up.
Perfect. And while you do that, folks attending, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat while the presentation's happening. We'll get to those after the Deputy Commissioner's presentation.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and I am excited to talk about health insurance because it's a weird quirk of the job, but I kind of love talking about health insurance. But it's also one of those strange things where, think about the reactions most people get when you say, like, to your family or to your friends, let's talk about health insurance, right? Like, most people aren't like Elf here going, yay, this is so exciting, right? They're probably, I know I get a lot of rolled eyes, heavy sighs. I was at family gathering this weekend and someone cornered me, started complaining about a complaint that they had with their health insurance company. Health insurance is not exactly a happy experience for most folks, right? And the experiences that Minnesotans have with their health insurance and healthcare in general, they're important, and we want those experiences to be guiding us here at the state so we can figure out how to best serve Minnesotans with changes to health policy. So today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what's happening here at the state and some of our priorities as an administration, kind of dive in a little bit in what's happening at the state and federal level, as well as what some more meaty stuff that we're doing here at the Department of Commerce. And then, because my understanding is you had a few questions about reinsurance, I will also do a pretty deep dive into that policy as well, because it's pretty current and we're in the middle of a comment period and we'd love your thoughts. All right. So for the Department of Commerce and for the Walz administration, our priorities in health policy is really for Minnesotans to have access to healthcare that's both accessible and affordable. So we try to place a priority in making sure we're getting good value from the money we're spending as a state. We want to strategically spend our money on programs that not only lower costs, but also strive to improve on how Minnesotans access and receive care. So, for example, we don't want to be wasting state dollars on old clunky IT systems that don't really work. We want to make sure we're investing our money, our state money, your money, wisely. So, but it's not just an economic decision. Healthcare is very personal, and we want to make sure we're doing the right thing morally as well. So certainly one lesson I think many of us take from the COVID-19 pandemic is how important it is for all Minnesotans to have the healthcare that they do need. And so, I know I see this, I'm sure a lot of you see this, when we get caught up in talking about health policy issues, we're talking about budgets, we're talking about just like things that don't really seem to matter. And something that I'm trying to do, something Commissioner Arnold's trying to do, and others, and in leadership roles here around the state, we're trying to make sure we're keeping people front and center in our conversations and the decisions we're making. So with that in mind, one of the questions we've been asking ourselves as an administration and across with my colleagues kind of across other departments here at the state is, what direction are we trying to go in with our health policy work? So in collaboration with groups like the Department of Human Services, the Department of Health, MMB with our state employees health insurance plan, we've been trying to think through what our approaches are when we're dealing with these health policy issues. And really, we're trying to look at the whole system of healthcare. So we came up with 4 themes that help us kind of across the board try to shape our priorities at the state level. So one is investing in healthcare infrastructure. The second is improving healthcare access. The third is developing a more equitable and a better funded healthcare system. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, trying to identify and put in place transformational reforms. So within those priorities, Commerce has a section of that work, and we have some responsibilities, but really it's a collaborative effort and taking actions at multiple levels, both within our own agency, with the states, and we do a lot, especially in the healthcare space, we do a lot of work with our colleagues at the federal level as well. So I'm going to start with our federal work. So there's the Hubert Humphrey building. I don't know if folks know that, but the HHS building in DC is named after a Minnesotan. And I always thought that was like the coolest thing when I went in there. It's also, I think, the ugliest building in DC, but that aside. So, the decisions that happen in DC obviously have a huge impact on what's happening here in Minnesota. Right now, for a lot of folks who are buying insurance on their own, for example, in the individual market, there's an investment of the American Rescue Plan. So a record number of Minnesotans have actually enrolled in health plans through MNsure for 2022. And people across the state are saving money on those insurance premiums, thanks to those tax credits. Those tax credits are set to expire at the end of this year. So they go away for next year, for 2023. And that's a lot of money for a lot of people. And it predominantly, because of how rates are set, really disproportionately impacts people who are living in greater Minnesota and people who tend to be a little bit older. So this is an area that we are following very closely. We are having lots of conversations with folks, with the congressional delegation. MNsure has been pushing hard on this. I know health plans are pushing hard on this. It's really something we're encouraging people to even be aware of and to make a decision earlier rather than later. 2 other a little wonkier areas where we are working rather closely with our federal colleagues at CMS, or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, are one is on the implementation of the No Surprises Act. So that's a new federal law that went into effect in 2022 that's meant to help protect people from various types of surprise or balance bills. So we are in the process of trying to work with CMS to figure out how do we best enforce that law and who do we need to talk to about that, and how do we help people when they have a complaint or an issue with a balance bill. The second is the ending of the public health emergency. So with COVID, Minnesotans have been able to stay on various types of insurance, so like medical assistance, throughout the past couple of years. And once that public health emergency ends, everyone's going to be going through a redetermination process. And if need be, they may need to switch coverage and purchase their insurance through their employer or through something like MNsure. So at Commerce, what we're trying to figure out is like, what sort of additional safety nets can we put in place to help protect people, and work with our other stakeholders and groups to basically try to figure that out and make things as smooth as possible in a rather probably chaotic situation. Here at the state, one of the things we're really focused on is cost. And cost is an issue in healthcare that requires action, obviously, across all systems and all levels. So one of the things here at Commerce we've really been thinking about is like innovation and how we can use innovation to address cost and bring about transformational change. And one of the areas that here in Commerce that we've specifically been working on is around long-term care insurance. So a little related to health insurance, but connected. So we're working with companies to create new types of long-term care products and for businesses to be able to offer those long-term care insurance products for individuals and employers and for the state. So we've had, a pretty good set of bipartisan support with these sort of insurance innovations in the past, and we're hopeful that this is one of those things that where we can continue to move it forward. Also, the COVID pandemic has obviously created all sorts of different types of demands around innovation and transformation. People needed their services delivered in a different way. Telehealth is a great example of that helped to meet that demand. Certainly, we've seen a lot and we've heard a lot anecdotally and in looking at data on this is around the transition telehealth has had for transforming services around mental health care. And so one of the things we're trying to spend a lot of time on too is just what's worked well for the past couple of years and how do we apply that moving forward, and what hasn't worked well and where do we need to maybe go back to what we were doing before. So at the state level, as we consider what's needed in healthcare, we're also focused on where we can innovate, where we can invest, we can bring about some of those more transformational changes in our healthcare system. Where can we invest so we can save money in the future? And so it's also important for us to, as we're thinking through all this, is to really consider about that value proposition around the healthcare policies and practices themselves. Jumping over more specifically to commerce, within our own agency, this past year, we completed a series of health insurance mandate reviews that the legislature gave us responsibilities for. So our intention with that is for those reviews to be a helpful tool for policymakers to be able to make decisions about the goals of healthcare that Minnesotans can access and afford. So going forward, our intention is for those reviews to become an even more effective tool as we make improvements to our analysis and to our recommendations. Another area of focus internally here at Commerce is really looking to strengthen our own agency's infrastructure in terms of our own organizational structures and process. I think people sometimes forget a lot of those, the day-to-day work at a state government is super important. And like a lot of companies and organizations, we're experiencing changes in our workforce, both because of retirements or, people have different priorities, which is great, but we're trying to rethink what that means for our work and what we need to do and how can we do our work better looking forward. We all, I think, agree we want a stable, one of the things we're also thinking through is we just really do care about the reviews that we're doing on health insurance products that are coming across our desks. So one of the things we're really focused on is wanting a reliable and a stable marketplace for health insurance. So we want to be able to sustain that. We want to make sure our insurers are financially viable. That's a huge part of what we do. We want to make sure that they can pay those bills when you've got them.
Yeah.
And be able to pay those claims. So then within Minnesota's individual health insurance market, one of the things we're pretty proud of is that every county has at least 2 insurers offering health plans, and all but 7 counties have 3 or more. And that's great. And that's really great when we look at what's happening in other states across the country. But obviously that key question, the next question, that's great, we have a stable marketplace, but what does that actually mean for those plans? And are those health plans available, actually affordable to people? So I am going, oh, did I get all of that? Making sure I'm not missing anything here. Speaking of affordability, I'm going to jump into reinsurance, which is a little bit of a topic that we've had here in the state. So I'm going to jump backwards a little bit and then bring us up to the present. So here in Minnesota, this is just how Minnesotans get healthcare. So this is this little piece here around the fully insured market and small group, individual group, and some short-term health insurance plan coverage. That's what we at Commerce get to look at. So it's, I'd say roughly about 16% of the market or so. If I do my math correctly. So a little under 1 million Minnesotans. But within the individual market itself, about 17 or a little under 200,000 Minnesotans get their healthcare coverage through the individual market. So that's really anyone without access to coverage from an employer or from a public program plan like Medicare or Medicaid, Minnesota Care. The folks that buy insurance on their own, anything from farmers, daycare providers. My mother-in-law took early retirement from her legal aid job and she buys coverage on her own. It's a whole smattering of people, but it's an important way for folks to get insurance. In 2016, 2017, before reinsurance was implemented here in Minnesota, a couple of things were sort of happening all at once. Some federal programs that provided some stability to the individual market expired. There were tax credits that were available to a portion of people who bought insurance on their own. But there were still, what we were seeing was still people who were making above 400% of that federal poverty limit were still very vulnerable to any sort of instability that was happening in the marketplace. In reaction to all that instability, insurance companies were essentially raising their rates. We were seeing enrollment caps. We were seeing things like narrow network, provider networks. We had at least one company that exited. Premiums were going up. We were seeing drops in the number of people enrolling in coverage. So a shift between 300,000 people to 160,000 is pretty significant in a tiny market. So we were trying to figure out how do we essentially stop that from continuing and making things sort of spiral out of control even more. So in 2017, Minnesota did pass a new law. It's a state-based reinsurance program. It's called the Minnesota Premium Security Plan. We were one of the first states in the country to do this, and many other states copied us after we did it and did it well. We had some pretty good effects. So it's designed to alleviate the impact of high claim costs. So it essentially reduces the risk to insurance companies. Mm-hmm. And in turn, that means they're able to lower premiums for people who are buying insurance on their own. This program does require that we get a waiver from the federal government. So we do work really closely with our federal colleagues at CMS and Department of Treasury on getting this approved. So the waiver process itself, it's called a 1332 waiver, and it's via the Affordable Care Act. So the same law that did Obamacare also created this. There are some requirements that we have to meet as part of that waiver process. So healthcare has to be at least as comprehensive as it was prior to the waiver. It has to be at least as affordable as it was prior to the waiver. Coverage provided has to be provided to at least a comparable number of people as it was without the waiver. And the big one that the federal government is very focused on is that it doesn't increase the federal deficit. So in terms of how this works and how it ends up here in Minnesota, because reinsurance lowers the premiums, it also lowers the federal tax credits that Minnesotans use to make their insurance more affordable. So when you have higher premiums, you have higher federal tax credits, lower premiums, lower federal tax credits. The waiver essentially says, we want to take that that difference, those federal tax dollars, and use those federal funds to support our reinsurance program here in Minnesota. So it's budget neutral to the federal government, but we essentially take that money. Insurance companies lower their premiums, tax credits go down, and we take that and then invest it back into the state. The program is overseen by MCHA, or the Minnesota Comprehensive Health Association. So they used to run the high-risk pool here in Minnesota. So they do all of our auditing, all the accounting. They have all these payment procedures to make sure reinsurance payments get made to carriers. We work really closely with MCHA and oversee pieces of that work, and they work with actuaries to look at all the numbers. They do all their actuarial number things. And so they're also the ones that sort of think through do the analysis of all the claims and that sort of thing. We have regular reports. All that information is available on our website if you ever want to dig into many of these fun details. Just to give you a sense of the money around some of this, we do pull in a fair amount of federal funding. You'll see a huge jump right around 2021, and that's because of the American Rescue Plan. So because of the additional tax credits that are coming into the state, we also get a little bit of extra money there as well. So we anticipate that when those tax credits go away in 2023, that the federal funding will also reduce. If you want to just get a sense of how things sort of break down across the state, we have 9 rating areas in the state, and the money ends up being rather proportional to the population. So rating area 8 is the Twin Cities. I think 1 and 3 southeastern Minnesota, if I remember correctly, if I'm thinking of my map. It's amazing I don't have this memorized yet. But if you get, but you can get a sense of like how things are sort of distributed across the state. So in terms of the impact here in Minnesota, the waiver for the past 5 years has certainly maximized federal funding. We've been able to reduce individual market premiums. Rates from 2018 to 2021 were about 20% lower than they would have been without the program being in place. So we don't compare it. We basically, the insurance companies all have to submit their rates to us every year, and they submit it in 2 ways. So they basically say, here's what our rates would be with a reinsurance program, and here's what our rates would be without the reinsurance program, and that's what we use to compare. So it's not that healthcare costs still go up, rates still go up every year. But this is just that comparison with or without the program. The reimbursement was a little bit different in 2021. We shrunk the size of the program to reduce some of the state dollars associated with it because we had some of these additional federal tax credits. So the impact was a little lower this past year, or this current year, I guess I should say. I mean, everyone who was in all the carriers that were in the market in 2017 have remained, which is great. And for plan year 2022, all of our counties have more than 1 carrier, which is also one of our goals. So where we are right now, the state legislature did pass new legislation authorizing us to apply for a federal waiver for another 5 years. The waivers are a 5-year program. We did get 3 years of funding for that as well. So we are in the process of applying for our new waiver. So the waiver would be for plan years 2023 to 2027. The continuation of our reinsurance program is contingent on the federal government's approval of our waiver. And we estimate that we'll continue to see about a little over 80 million coming in for 2023 with that program in place. The other kind of weird thing about this program is under the previous administration, they basically said, if you're getting with the reinsurance program, we'll give you the additional tax dollars, but we're going to reduce the amount that we are paying to the basic health plan through Minnesota Care. So our waiver does request that we hold Minnesota Care's federal funding stream harmless in this process. CMS has also told us that they anticipate doing a rule on this as well, which would address the funding issue. So hopefully Minnesota is not harmed in that way moving forward. But overall, our goal for this program is to really make sure that health insurance is more affordable in the individual market. We are very concerned about what's going to happen here in the fall with the additional subsidies going away. So what I keep saying is that hopefully this program will help temper the effect of that premium increase that people might feel. Again, just in conclusion, our goal is to really make sure that people can access and afford their insurance. Our goal is to help individuals and families like you all. And research has proven time and again, when people have access to their insurance, it saves us all money. So we want to be making decisions that are based on data, decisions that are good for Minnesotans, and making sure we're keeping an eye on not just Minnesotans now, but Minnesotans in the future as well. So I'd also like to close by saying it's one of the things that I like about my job and things that I find really important here in my job is that I hear from people like you all about what's working for you as purchasers of healthcare, what's working well, what's not working, what else do you need? Because when you share those experiences, we really do take those into account and it does help us be better at our jobs and make better decisions, not just here in the state, but we do pass that information along to our federal colleagues as well. So I will pause there.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I am happy to take questions.
that was great. No, I know a number of our members, as family farmers are on the individual market. I've been on the individual market in the past prior to Farmers Union when I worked on political campaigns in a younger phase of my life. So it's interesting to hear about how this all works. And we do have a couple of questions. It's in the Q&A section, and it's from one of our members, Mark. And his question is, Minnesota healthcare is twice the cost of healthcare in the most efficient modern nations. Those other countries have better healthcare outcomes than we do. How do we reform healthcare finance to make it cost effective? What is the model which will ensure everyone and save the money to make healthcare affordable? Shouldn't our goal be to be as cost effective as other modern nations? So a pretty long question there, but maybe break it up into chunks if you're.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the $1 million question that we're all sort of trying to figure out. All of us in the healthcare space. I think there are lots of ways to make change. Here in Minnesota, I try to focus on what it is that we can do here at Commerce, what we can do as a state. There are some proposals and this is the Department of Health that owns this policy, but they do have a proposal related to healthcare costs and doing some healthcare cost targets and bringing in some additional data to help us understand how we can better control healthcare costs here in the state.
Sure. Yeah, and he had one follow-up question too. He asked, is it sensible for administrative healthcare costs in the U.S. to be taking 30% of the healthcare money? That was his last question there from our audience.
Yeah, I know administrative healthcare costs are always a concern. I can say within the rates that we're reviewing, there are some laws that require insurance companies to spend a certain percentage of their money on healthcare, and if they don't, they do have to reimburse that to their policyholders. So that is something we do look at.
Awesome. We have one question from our communications director, Janet Kubit. She says, in Southeast Minnesota, healthcare insurance costs are higher because of what people call the quote Mayo effect. What can the state do to reduce the higher cost of premiums in the Southeast region?
That's a tough question. I think that's one of the things we were, when we've talked collectively with folks around the state, one of the areas we've looked at really is like healthcare costs and some of that disparity. And we are seeing a little bit of competition with health plans come into the southeastern part of the state, with courts coming in. So those costs are a lot lower, but they also don't have Mayo in their clinic. The federal government has done there's a fair bit of information on hospital price transparency. So I think there's a lot moving in this space. People are starting to focus on provider costs and what's happening there. I don't think we have any good answers at this point. Yeah. I'd say we're trying to figure out what are we looking at really, and what does that mean, and what sort of decisions should we make based on that moving forward.
Sure. Awesome. And then one of the last questions here we've got from Linda Larson, one of our very dear members. Is there any oversight for what healthcare facilities charge the consumer? From insurance companies to medical facilities to pharma, costs skyrocket with no inquiry about price gouging. Your thoughts?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of insight into what healthcare facilities do charge the consumer. Like I said, there has been some push around some price transparency in the provider space. Some of that is very focused on like conceptually, your insurance company, right, is supposed to negotiate those prices for you and to lower some of those costs. That doesn't always work the way it's supposed to, right? like the no surprises bill is supposed to get a piece of that around some of the price gouging, particularly in a very vulnerable situation, like in an emergency room visit. Um, yeah, so
Yeah,
I'd say there's less oversight in the provider space than there is in other parts of the healthcare space.
sure. No, thank you. And we want to be respectful of your time. We're coming up here on 12:45, and very, very content-heavy presentation that we're really grateful for. And I know I learned a lot. And for folks who tuned in live, thank you for your questions. We'll be posting this, an edited version of this, on our YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. We'll share a link. But this was really great information, and thanks so much for joining us. Any parting words?
Oh, I did see another question about insurance rates in Minnesota and why not have all the same.
Sure.
Wouldn't that be more equitable? Yeah, it's a tough question. We do have some laws in around how many rating areas we can have in the state. And so that was a decision that was made certainly prior to me being there, and certainly something we continue to look at. I think equitable is always a little different for everyone. So we're trying to figure out how can we, make costs affordable for as many people as we can too. So those are some of those things that we're looking at. It's not an easy decision and not an easy conversation, but it's a good question.
Yeah, no, and thank you for noticing that question. When Linda's popped in, that one moved to the top, and I didn't notice that one. So thank you for
No,
noticing.
that's
that.
okay.
Perfect. No, thank you so much. And like I said, we're at time, and thank you so much for joining us today. And we appreciate your knowledge and all of that. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. And definitely, if you have comments on the reinsurance program, it's public comment period right now, so you are welcome to go to our website and submit comments. We do welcome them.
Awesome. Action steps for our members watching. Sounds great.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.